So today I'm here talking with Tara, who is a private client solicitor for Kerseys Solicitors. So, Tara, can you tell me what happens if we do not make a will?
So, if a person doesn't make a will, when they die, this will mean that their estate is intestate. What this means is in England and Wales, you have certain laws, the law of intestacy, that will dictate who the beneficiaries of that person's estate will be. Now, many people often assume that if you're married, your spouse will automatically inherit everything, and that's not always the case. For instance, if you are married with children, under the law of intestacy at this moment in time, the first £270,000 in a deceased person's sole name, including investments, property, would pass to the surviving spouse, and anything remaining in the deceased sole name would be split between the spouse and children. And this may not be your intention, your wish. Also, you may want to think what would happen if you're not married and didn't have children. The law of intestacy contains a list of family members who would be entitled to inherit in a certain priority. And again, this may not be what you want. For instance, if when you think about your estate, you want some or part of your estate to go to your friends, under the law of intestacy, they would not be able to inherit. The other thing that you should also consider is if you're not married, if you are in a long-term relationship with someone, so a cohabiting with someone, your partner will not automatically inherit under the law of intestacy. And it is in circumstances like this why it is so important for you to do a will.
Okay, so we can see the importance then of making a will, but what about those that are thinking about doing a homemade will? What are the options there?
It is possible for a person to make a homemade will, but in my opinion, these do come with an element of risk. Um, Firstly, when making a homemade will and putting certain gifts in a clause, mistakes can happen. And if the person who made that homemade will has died, it is often time consuming and costly for the executors to arrange for these to be corrected. And also, when it comes to drafting wills, language is always so important. And if an individual making a homemade will feels that they're clear, that may not be the case legally. And if the homemade will is unclear or ambiguous, your executors may end up having to go to court anyway to get directions or an interpretation of that said will.
Okay, I can see how that makes sense. Is there anything else then that we need to know about when making a homemade will?
The other problems that are connected with homemade wills comes with the execution of the will, the signing of the will. There are always quite a lot of rules when it comes to signing of the will, and if a will has not been signed correctly, it will be invalid. So a person having made a homemade will may be under the misconception they have a valid will in place, and if the validity of that will is disputed and say the will is effectively thrown out, then the law of intestacy would apply to that person's estate. That's why it's always best, in my opinion, to get professional and legal advice when making a will, because we will ensure that the will is drawn up correctly and that the person's wishes are correctly reflected in the will. And finally, we will ensure that the will is validly signed. So when you do a will with solicitors, you will have that reassurance that you have a valid will.
Okay, so those are some really valid points to keep in mind. But what are some of the other key things that we need to consider when making a will?
There are many things that you need to consider when making a will. I'd say, firstly, you need to consider the extent of your estate. This is what you would be potentially be giving away in your will. Often, when solicitors take instructions for a will, we will ask the client about their assets and the extent of their assets, which assists us really when drawing up a will. This also allows us to provide inheritance tax advice should the need arise. Secondly, you'll need to think about who's going to be in charge of your estate after you pass away, who is going to deal with the administration of the estate. This person is known as the executor, and again, the solicitor will be able to outline your options and guide you when deciding who your executor should be. It is also important for you to think about the people that you wish to inherit from your estate. These people will be known as your beneficiaries. If the beneficiaries are young, you'll need to think about the age you may wish for them to inherit. Again, a solicitor will be able to outline your options. Then you need to consider the type of gift that you can make. In a will, there are many types of gifts and even some trusts that you can put in regarding a person's inheritance. And it really depends on your circumstances and what you want when it comes to your will. And again, the solicitor will be able to outline your options and provide you with advice. The other things for you to consider will be a guardian for any minor children, who is going to look after your young children if something were to happen to you. Funeral wishes, so if you have a very specific set of ideas regarding your funeral. There are a lot of things for you to think about when making a will, and whilst you're not expected to do a lot of prep work before giving instructions to a solicitor, it is always good to just have a think about the things I've mentioned. But don't worry if you don't, the solicitor will be able to talk you through those considerations.